Okay, one thing that I didn't explain in the last video was the need to put on a bleed. Basically, the idea of the bleed is, which is represented by this red, is that here's the actual document that you want, but you put a bleed so that you make sure that everything that's supposed to go right here goes further. It's both handy in print. In fact, it's a must with print-based work that goes right to the edge. And it's helpful in this case as well. Now let me show you a couple things regarding that. If you have print that you want to go right to the edge of something, it becomes a big bummer, because then you either have to make the text big enough to go across, or in this is more likely, especially if you're working with a good talented printer, is you just tell them, you know, I want this text to go right to the edge and I'm giving you the 1/8 of an inch bleed, but could you please try to hold really tight tolerance? In which case then what you would do is you just draw in the extra color and make sure that it goes to the bleed. So you do this all the way around to the E here. You're trying to avoid these little bits of white that could possibly show up. So here, boy, it's really tough. It's almost like in a case like this, I would say if you don't trust your printer, just redesign. If you do trust your printer, show them what you're trying to do, because yeah, with these rounded letter forms, you're either totally going to destroy the look, or, you know, but most of the time you don't do stuff like this anyway. It's a tangent. But if you were, like I said, you got to deal with that. You know, now if you do this, what's most likely going to happen is it's going to get cut off here, and then again you're losing the integrity of the letter form. So kind of weird design anyway. Two other things. One, like here I'm not using the bleed properly, and I'm going to show you some examples of what can happen. Also, if you've got a white background, like let's say this was your design, if you've got a white background, you actually need to put a rectangle in there for the background, because otherwise when you go to export it, you're going to end up with this. Let me go into Photoshop and I'll show you what I got. Okay, you get the transparent background, so you do need to put in white. Also, another issue is you've got to turn off the bleeds, otherwise it exports the bleeds with it. So let's go back, take care of a couple of those problems one at a time. So first problem is to get white underneath here. So what I'm going to do is create a new layer. And then I'm going to make a white box that'll be my background. Now I'm going to make it all the way to the bleed. And change its color to white by changing over to properties with this selected, and then go to the fill and select white. Now the only issue is it's on top, so I'll take this layer, drag it underneath. So that takes care of that problem. Now what we should do, if we're smart, is take these things and make them go to the bleed. I'm going to show you what happens potentially wrong if you don't. Now first, to get this right, we have to turn the bleed off. We already talked about that, so we're going to do that. Okay, so that was just File, Document Setup, and inside of there I just zeroed the bleed out. Now you can see the bleed is gone, but the document still bleeds beyond the original artboard. It's just that red line that represented it is gone. Okay, so even though it looked good going right to the edge, what happens sometimes is you get, especially if you see it against a black background, you got these little slivers of white. So basically the bottom line is there, just make sure you do it right. When you got a bleed, use it, go all the way to the bleed line. Even though it's not there, I can still see where it was. And then that way you don't end up with those kind of problems. The thing we're going to do to make our lives a little bit easier here is create a new folder and just call it like billboard try. Then everything we save we can put in there, super easy to find as we're working. Okay, back in Illustrator, I made this demo, nothing pretty about it, but I just wanted to do something with rectangles in it so you could see that the perspective is quite exceptional in Photoshop. So what we're going to do, let's pretend now that you're working on yours. First thing you want to do is one last save. Then we're going to do a file, save as, and we'll go ahead and save it in that folder that we just made. and I'm going to add for export to the end of it, so that way I know that if I screw something up on this, I can always go back to the other one. It's inside my billboard try, so I'm going to save it. If you didn't already, make sure that you set the bleeds to 0 so you don't see that red line going around there. And then figure out which artboard you're going to use if you've got multiples. And remember, the way you figure that out, which artboard it is just select something on the artboard and it tells you right there which artboard it is. So in my case, I'm going to use artboard number 1. When we export this, we want to export it at the same pixels per inch, same resolution as the image that it's going into that we used to find out how big to make this in the first place. So what we want to do is go into Photoshop, open that image up, go up to image, image size, and we can see the resolution is 72 pixels per inch. Before I go away from this image in Photoshop, I'm going to do a file, save as, and I'm going to save this away from whatever format it was before. It might be a PNG, JPEG, and I'm going to do a Photoshop document, PSD. Where are you? Oh, right there, very top one, Photoshop, PSD, Photoshop document. Where will be that folder that we made inside of the billboard try folder. And the reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to export my Illustrator work as a PSD, and that way both files I'm working on are the same. So I'm going to click save, and then I'm actually going to close this down. In fact, I'm going to close everything that I have going on in Photoshop, but leave it open. Then I'm going to go back into Illustrator and actually export this. So I know that it's artboard number 1 that I want to export, and I know that it's 72 pixels per inch. So now I'm going to go File, Export, Export As, and then I am going to select Photoshop as the type of document. I'm going to name this something that makes sense, like my artwork for billboard. I'm going to put it in the billboard try folder. Photoshop document. Use artboards. Very important that you check this. If you got multiple artboards, check range and put the number of the artboard in there. In my case, 1. Click export. And since we're doing this for an image, RGB color format is fine. Since we're doing it for like a web-based image, not a print-based image, I should say. Resolution we said that we wanted in this case was 72. We want a flat image. We do not want to write the layer, so make sure that that is clicked, flat image. Anti-aliasing, type optimize as opposed to art optimized is what we want, and we do want to embed the ICC profiles for the web, so check that. Okay, click OK, and then we're going to go ahead, find that image, should be back in our folder, and we're going to open it in Photoshop just to make sure that everything is good, that we're ready to continue. So there we go, open with Photoshop. And what we're looking for is that there's no slivers of white there, and I can hit the F key, just run through the F key cycles, and I get it against a black background here, make sure nothing's wrong. Go up to image, image size, and make sure that it is 72 pixels per inch, and it was the original size or very, very close to it that we started working on originally, that we discovered from the last video. Now I'm going to close this image again, so I have nothing open in Photoshop. Now there's multiple ways of bringing two images together. Use your favorite method. If you don't have a favorite method, I'm just going to show you one that rarely goes wrong. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here with nothing open in Photoshop. I'm going to go File, Scripts. I'm going to go to Load Files into Stacks. Now, what I do is I click Browse, and luckily we put this in the one folder, so it's really easy to find. And what I want to open up is the original billboard image and my artwork for it. And I can click and command click. And I could actually, just so you know, click a whole bunch of different images, and they would all open, each one as a different layer. When I click open right now, you'll see what happens. Click OK again, is in my layers I will now have two layers, one with the artwork on it and one with the billboard. Now the billboard's on top of the artwork, so I just need to click and drag that down. Now you can see both things. If I toggle the eyeball, there's my artwork, and there is the original image. Okay, so now zooming in and out and making enough space for all this stuff, what we want to do is just make sure that we can see the billboard and your artwork. Take the move tool, click on your artwork. Now you have to make sure that you're on the right channel, or the right layer when you do that. So click on this layer, grab the move tool, move this over. And what I like to do is just move it in nice and close, but so that I can still see at least three corners of this billboard. And before we get too far, it's a good idea to do a save as. Save this thing out as something that makes sense to you. You can go ahead and name it already, last name underscore first name billboard maybe, because we're getting pretty close to having a finished file here. But just make sure that it goes into that same folder just for convenience, and then save from now on every few steps. Okay, now what you do is you go up to Edit, and again, make sure that your layer with your artwork is the one that's selected. You go up to Edit, and you go to Perspective Warp, and then you get this little tool here. And then you're going to click and drag on the, basically making a rectangle around your work. Once you have that, as good as you think you can get it, because you can move it and change it a little bit as you go. And you're going to find that you may have to do this more than one time. And this is important. If you want to use guides to help you find these corners, that's okay. But do not use guides to help you find these corners, because it messes with this as of CC 18. So once you have this done, you go up to the top here and you click Warp. Now you take all four corners and you place them to the appropriate corners on the billboard. And sometimes it helps to underdo it first so that you can actually see them and come back to it properly. But there's almost no way I found to do this perfect. Either you go a little bit too big or you go a little bit too small, and we'll talk about fixes for that. But that's it. You just get it close, and then once you have it where you want, you hit return. And you can see I came pretty close. There's just a little bit of white there. So I could either back up, try it again, or I'm going to show you a couple quick fixes that you can do as well. Okay, so we'll conclude with 3 tips here. One for erasing, one for cloning, and then a couple ideas for making it look more convincing. But let's say you went too far, and you can really only tell that by turning this off, turning it back on. You can see I went maybe just a little bit too far on the bottom. So if you were really nitpicky about this, you could use masking. You could just simply delete that area. Again, make sure you're on that layer. And then what you might want to do is turn this layer off, but then just kind of make use the selection tool, the polygonal lasso tool, and just click and highlight. And I'm just going to do a real quick thing here to show you. I'm not going to go all the way across. But if you do this, then turn this layer back on and make sure that's the layer that's selected, and now you click delete. You will only delete what's inside of this area. So you'll probably be able to see if I slide over the difference between where I did and I didn't do. Actually, it was so thin you really can't even tell. But that's a good trick for that. Now, if you have areas here where you didn't quite get enough and you're done with just trying, then in that case, what you might want to do is, again, make sure that you are on this layer for your artwork. And I still like to make a little area when I do this. Actually, I can go down into here further into the color that I'm going to clone. But then if I come up here and make a selection, it will make sure that I can't clone into the sky. Then I just simply grab the clone stamp tool. And the way you use this tool is you hold down the Option key to select the area that you want to clone from, and then you click in the area that you want to clone to. So I'm clicking with the Option key on down here, and then I'm just regular clicking up there. And so what I'm doing is filling that color in so it looks Perfect.